Hi all, PlanetSide Agent here. Today I'm just going to summarize using alternate stoves for the Esbit stainless steel coffee maker. It's kind of summarize my findings. And basically, if you're going to use this, you're going to have to make sure you've got for whatever type of stove you're going to use, you'll need to make sure that it has a pot stand that will handle this very narrow base, which is like, say, 2 inches across here, and it's kind of rounded. So it has to be kind of really narrow so that it will fit on it. That's number one. Number two, I found that it's best if you have a good even heat all the way across the bottom. I did try this with my Fancy Feast alcohol stove, and I found out that when this is on here, it sits, when you sit on the pot stand, it pretty much centers itself on the stove, and most of the flame pattern comes up the side here and around. So you're just heating kind of the sides. And when I did that, I just didn't get a very good cup of coffee. What happened was it would start to brew and sprout out, but the first bit of water was just clear, and the last part wasn't very dark. So I don't think it was building up enough pressure fast enough to force the water up through the coffee grounds. And on the other end of the spectrum from that is I did try this on a propane stove, and again, the one I used, I put it away already, I'd show you, but it had a very narrow burner head, about that big, so it got good heat on the bottom like that. You know, some of the other kind of propane stoves have, some of them have some pretty large heads, and there again you'd have the same problem with most of the heat coming out and around the side, and it just doesn't really, I think, pressurize the stove correctly enough to get a good brew. Like I said, the one I did with Fancy Feast was very watery. Okay, the one I did with the OE-Tech City stove, which actually had pot stands that were to get down small enough where this would sit on just nicely. The heat was pretty much on the bottom, and it heated it right up, and it started to brew very nicely. I mean, it started dark right out of the top, but I think in the case of the propane stove, it was just way too hot. And because both tests I did with it, I started to get leaks around the seam, and I think what happens is it gets too hot, it overpressurizes, not enough to blow the safety relief valve here, but enough to get around the gaskets on here. And I had it as tight as I could really get it, and it still wanted to leak out from around the gaskets. And one time it actually went down the side, and it actually put out the stove and left coffee in there. I'd tear the whole stove apart and clean all the sticky coffee out of it. So I think the wood, when I did on the wood stove, worked just fine. I think the heat wasn't as hot as the propane, and it sat on here and it brewed a nice cup of coffee because it was just that sweet spot of heat, not too hot, not too cold. The Esbit stove comes with it, works fine. Of course, that's what it was designed for. So it's a little lower heat output. So I would say if you're going to use any kind of stove, just be aware if it's a high heat stove like a propane. I never tried it on the stove itself, on an electric burner in the house stove, but I imagine it'd work. But and I'm not sure how the heat output of that would work or not. I have no intentions of doing it on the stove, using this on the stove, because I've got other ways of making coffee. I got French presses and, yada, 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 all kinds. So anyway, so I guess in summary, you can use this Esbit Coffee Maker on different types of stoves, but just be aware that the performance will vary greatly. Some of it on both ends, very weak coffee or too darn hot and causes leakage around the seam, and to something in the sweet spot like the wood stove or the one that comes, the Esbit tablets that come with it. So anyway, that's it for my series on the Esbit stainless steel coffee maker using alternative stoves. I hope you enjoyed the series. If you have any questions, just throw them down in the comments, and I'll try to answer them. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.